1. Early America, before 1492. Before Europeans arrived, the land of present-day USA was inhabited by Native American tribes such as the Cherokee, Sioux, and Apache. They had their own cultures, languages, and civilizations. In 1492, Christopher Columbus made his famous voyage and reached the Americas, opening the door for European exploration. After Columbus, other European powers, including Spain, France, and England, began sending explorers to discover and claim new lands across the continent. These explorers weren't just traveling for adventure, they wanted wealth, land, and influence. Spain focused heavily on the south and west, France explored the north and along rivers, and England looked to settle along the eastern coast. One of the most important milestones came in 1607, when the English established the Jamestown settlement in what is now Virginia. Jamestown became the first permanent English colony in North America, paving the way for future settlements and eventually shaping the foundation of what would become the United States. This period of exploration set the stage for cultural exchanges, trade, and also conflicts that would impact the history of the Americas for centuries to come. During this time, the 13 American colonies were growing increasingly frustrated with Great Britain. They faced high taxes and had no representation in the British Parliament. This led to a strong desire for independence and self-governance. Tensions eventually erupted into the American Revolutionary War in 1775, a conflict between the colonies and Britain that would last for 8 years. Battles were fought across the colonies, with ordinary citizens and militias standing up against the powerful British Army. One of the most important moments in this struggle came on July 4, 1776, when the colonies officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. This historic document boldly announced that the colonies were free and independent states, no longer under British rule. At the forefront of the fight was George Washington, commander of the colonial army, whose leadership and determination played a key role in uniting the colonies and guiding them toward victory. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and strategic victories, America officially gained its independence in 1783. The revolution not only created a new nation, but it also inspired the world with the idea that people could govern themselves and fight for their freedom. After winning independence, the United States faced a new challenge: how to govern itself. The early years under the Articles of Confederation revealed serious problems. The national government was weak, could not collect taxes effectively, and lacked the power to resolve disputes between states. It became clear that a stronger, more organized system was needed. In 1787, leaders from the states came together in Philadelphia for the United States Constitutional Convention. Their goal was to create a government that balanced power between a strong central authority and the rights of individual states. After months of debate, compromises, and careful planning, they produced the United States Constitution, a document that would become the foundation of American government. The Constitution established 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial, each with its own powers and responsibilities. This system of checks and balances ensured that no single branch could dominate the others. It also outlined the basic rights of citizens and created a framework for the rule of law that continues to guide the nation today. In 1789, following the ratification of the Constitution, George Washington was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. His leadership set important precedents for the presidency, including the formation of a cabinet of advisors and the peaceful transfer of power. Washington's calm, steady hand helped establish the legitimacy of the new government and inspired confidence among the people. During this period, the young nation also faced many challenges. They had to develop a stable economy, manage foreign relations, and maintain national unity. The first Congress passed critical laws, including the Bill of Rights in 1791, which guaranteed freedoms such as speech, religion, and assembly, protections that remained central to American democracy. The period from 1787 to 1800 was a time of experimentation, compromise, and growth. The Constitution provided the United States with a strong foundation, and the leadership of figures like George Washington showed that a government could function peacefully, even in a new and diverse nation. By the end of the century, the United States had firmly established itself as an independent nation with a working system of government, ready to face the challenges of a new century. Following the formation of the United States government, the young nation began a period of rapid expansion and transformation. Between 1800 and 1865, the United States grew both in size and in population, stretching its borders westward toward the Pacific Ocean. This westward movement, often called Manifest Destiny, was fueled by the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent. Settlers moved into new territories, seeking land, opportunity, and prosperity. The Louisiana Purchase, acquired in 1803, doubled the size of the nation and opened vast tracts for settlement. Later, territories such as Florida, Texas, and the Oregon Country were added, creating a nation that was geographically diverse and increasingly complex. While expansion brought economic growth, it also led to tensions between states. The addition of new territories raised questions about whether they would allow slavery. This became a major source of conflict, as northern states opposed the spread of slavery while southern states sought to maintain and expand it. The balance between free and slave states became a central issue in American politics, shaping debates in Congress and in society at large. By the mid-19th century, these tensions exploded into the American Civil War, fought from 1861 to 1865. The war was primarily about slavery and states' rights, but it also reflected deeper disagreements about the nation's identity and future. The Southern states, fearing the loss of their economic and social system based on slavery, seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. The Northern states, committed to preserving the Union, mobilized to bring them back. At the forefront of the Union's effort was Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States. Lincoln believed that the Union must be preserved at all costs and that slavery was morally wrong. His leadership provided direction, determination, and hope during the darkest days of the conflict. The war saw major battles such as Gettysburg, Antietam, and Fort Sumter, with tremendous loss of life on both sides. It also brought about significant social and political change, including the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which declared freedom for all enslaved people in Confederate territory. This shifted the purpose of the war, making the fight for freedom a central goal alongside preserving the Union. After 4 long and bloody years, the Union emerged victorious in 1865. The result was historic. Slavery was abolished through the 13th Amendment, fundamentally transforming the nation's legal and social framework. The Union was preserved, laying the foundation for the United States to continue its growth and development as a single, united country. The period from 1800 to 1865 was marked by expansion, conflict, and transformation. It showed how the United States was not just growing geographically, but also struggling to define its values and identity. The challenges of slavery, states' rights, and national unity tested the country in ways that would resonate for generations, shaping the path toward a more inclusive and democratic nation. By the dawn of the 20th century, the United States had transformed into a powerful industrial nation. Factories, railroads, and new technologies drove rapid economic growth, and the country emerged as a major player on the world stage. Cities grew as people moved from rural areas and immigrants arrived from Europe seeking opportunities. Industries such as steel, oil, and automobiles boomed, creating wealth and shaping modern American society. This period of industrialization also brought social changes. Workers organized to demand better wages, safer working conditions, and reasonable hours. Women began to play a more active role in the workforce, especially in urban centers. Education expanded, and advances in science and technology changed daily life, from electricity and telephones to automobiles and airplanes. Despite domestic growth, the United States was drawn into global affairs, particularly during World War I. Although the war began in 1914, the U.S. remained neutral for several years, focusing on trade and economic growth. However, by 1917, the United States entered the conflict on the side of the Allies. This marked a turning point in the war and signaled America's growing influence in world affairs. U.S. troops and resources helped tip the balance, leading to the eventual Allied victory in 1918. After World War I, the United States experienced the Roaring Twenties, a period of prosperity, cultural growth, and technological innovation. Jazz music, cinema, and consumer culture flourished. However, this prosperity was uneven, and in 1929, the nation plunged into the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in U.S. history. Millions were unemployed, and families struggled to survive. President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of programs designed to provide relief, recovery, and reform. These measures helped the country recover economically and socially. As the world moved toward another major conflict, tensions rose in Europe and Asia. In 1939, World War II began, but the United States initially remained neutral. That changed dramatically on December 7, 1941, when the Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This event shocked the nation and galvanized Americans to enter the war. The United States mobilized its industrial and military power on an unprecedented scale. Factories switched to wartime production, producing ships, planes, tanks, and weapons at extraordinary rates. Millions of men and women served in the armed forces, while others contributed on the home front through labor, rationing, and war bond drives. U.S. involvement in World War II included campaigns in both Europe and the Pacific. In Europe, American troops participated in major battles such as D-Day in 1944, helping liberate Nazi-occupied territories. In the Pacific, battles like Midway and Iwo Jima were crucial in defeating Japan. The war effort required immense cooperation between civilians, soldiers, and industry, showcasing the nation's ability to unite under a common purpose. By 1945, the United States had emerged from World War II as one of the world's most powerful nations. The war had solidified its position as a global leader, with unmatched industrial capacity and military strength. The conflict also set the stage for major international developments, including the founding of the United Nations and the beginning of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. In summary, the period from 1900 to 1945 was one of extraordinary transformation for the United States. Industrial growth reshaped the economy, social changes influenced daily life, and participation in two world wars established America as a global superpower. The challenges and achievements of these decades laid the groundwork for the modern United States and its role in shaping the 20th century and beyond. After the end of World War II in 1945, the United States emerged as one of the world's leading powers. The nation's industrial strength, military might, and economic growth positioned it as a global superpower, playing a central role in international affairs. At the same time, the world had changed. Europe was devastated by war, Japan had been defeated, and new political tensions were rising. One of the defining features of the post-war era was the Cold War, a period of political, military, and ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Although the two superpowers never engaged in direct large-scale conflict, they competed for influence around the globe. This rivalry led to events such as the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the space race, including the race to put a man on the moon. The Cold War also shaped U.S. foreign policy, with the government supporting allies, forming military alliances like NATO, and intervening in countries to prevent the spread of communism. During this period, the Vietnam War became one of the most significant and controversial conflicts in American history. Beginning in the 1950s and escalating in the 1960s, the United States sent troops to support South Vietnam against the communist forces of North Vietnam. The war caused deep divisions within the country, with widespread protests and debates about U.S. involvement. Ultimately, the war ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon, leaving a lasting impact on American politics, society, and foreign policy. Domestically, the United States also experienced major social changes. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s challenged racial segregation and discrimination, leading to landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Women's rights, environmental awareness, and technological innovation also became central themes of the modern era. The end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, marked by the collapse of the Soviet Union, transformed global politics. The United States became the sole superpower, shaping international policies on trade, security, and diplomacy. The 1990s and early 2000s saw rapid advances in technology, the rise of the Internet, and globalization, which connected the world economically and culturally. However, the modern era also brought new challenges. On September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks on the United States shocked the nation and the world, leading to the War on Terror, including military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. These events reshaped U.S. foreign policy and highlighted the importance of national security and international cooperation. Today, the United States remains one of the most influential countries in the world, with a strong economy, powerful military, and significant cultural impact. Its history, from post-war recovery to the challenges of the 21st century, demonstrates the nation's ability. The year 1945 marked the end of the devastating global conflict known as World War II, but it also marked the beginning of a new and tense chapter in world history. After the war, the United States emerged as one of the most powerful nations on Earth. Its economy was strong, its military was unmatched, and its influence spread across Europe and Asia. At the same time, another powerful nation, the Soviet Union, rose as a rival superpower. Although these two nations had been allies against Nazi Germany during the war, their political systems and ideologies were completely different. The United States believed in democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union supported communism and a centralized political system. This deep ideological divide created suspicion and competition between the two powers. Over time, this rivalry became known as the Cold War, a conflict that lasted from the mid-1940s until 1991. Unlike traditional wars, the Cold War was not fought through direct battles between American and Soviet troops. Instead, it involved political pressure, economic competition, military alliances, technological rivalry, and proxy wars around the world. Both nations tried to expand their influence while preventing the other side from gaining power. In the late 1940s, the United States became increasingly concerned about the spread of communism in Europe and other regions. American leaders believed that if communism continued to expand, democratic governments might collapse. In response to this concern, the United States worked to strengthen alliances with democratic countries. One of the most important steps occurred in 1949 with the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, commonly known as NATO. NATO was a military alliance formed between the United States, Canada, and several Western European countries. The alliance was based on a simple but powerful principle: if one member nation were attacked, all other members would come to its defense. This agreement created a strong defensive partnership designed to prevent Soviet expansion in Europe. The Soviet Union viewed NATO as a threat and responded by strengthening its own influence over Eastern European countries. As a result, the world became increasingly divided into two powerful political and military blocs. The tensions of the Cold War soon spread beyond Europe and into Asia. In 1950, a major conflict erupted on the Korean Peninsula, leading to what is known as the Korean War. Korea had been divided into two parts after World War II. North Korea adopted a communist government supported by the Soviet Union and China, while South Korea established a democratic government supported by the United States and its allies. In June 1950, North Korean forces crossed the border and invaded South Korea in an attempt to unite the peninsula under communist rule. The United States quickly responded by sending military forces as part of a United Nations coalition to defend South Korea. The war became extremely intense, with large-scale battles, heavy casualties, and rapid changes in territory. Chinese forces eventually joined the conflict in support of North Korea, making the war even more dangerous and complex. After 3 years of fighting, the war ended in 1953 with an armistice agreement. Although the fighting stopped, Korea remained divided into two nations, North Korea and South Korea, separated by a heavily fortified border. The Korean War demonstrated how Cold War rivalries could lead to real military conflicts even without direct war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Another major conflict influenced by Cold War tensions occurred in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, which lasted from the mid-1950s until 1975. Vietnam had also been divided into two regions. North Vietnam was led by a communist government, while South Vietnam was supported by the United States and its allies. American leaders feared that if South Vietnam fell to communism, other countries in Southeast Asia might follow, a theory known as the domino effect. Because of this fear, the United States gradually increased its military involvement in Vietnam during the 1960s. At its peak, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers were fighting in the region. The war was extremely difficult, involving jungle warfare, guerrilla tactics, and heavy bombing campaigns. It also became highly controversial within the United States, as many citizens began to question the purpose and cost of the war. Large protests and demonstrations took place across American cities and university campuses. After years of conflict and growing political pressure at home, the United States began withdrawing its troops in the early 1970s. In 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured the capital of South Vietnam, leading to the reunification of the country under communist rule. The Vietnam War left a lasting impact on American society, politics, and foreign policy. While military conflicts were a major part of the Cold War, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union also extended into science and technology. One of the most exciting and dramatic competitions of the era was the space race. Both superpowers wanted to prove that their technology, education systems, and scientific abilities were superior. The competition began in 1957 when the Soviet Union launched the world's first artificial satellite, Sputnik, into orbit around Earth. This achievement shocked the United States and created fears that the Soviet Union might be ahead in missile technology and scientific development. In response, the United States greatly expanded its investment in science education, engineering programs, and space exploration. The U.S. government established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, known as NASA, to lead the nation's space program. Throughout the late 1950s and 1960s, both countries launched satellites, sent astronauts and cosmonauts into space, and developed increasingly powerful rockets. The competition reached its most dramatic moment during the Apollo program. In 1961, American President John F. Kennedy announced an ambitious goal to land a human being on the moon before the end of the decade. After years of research, testing, and technological innovation, the United States achieved this remarkable objective in 1969 during the Apollo 11 moon landing. On July 20, 1969, astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface and became the first human being to walk on the moon. As millions of people watched the event on television around the world, Armstrong delivered the famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The moon landing represented a historic victory for the United States in the space race and demonstrated the incredible power of human innovation and scientific progress. Throughout the Cold War era, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union influenced politics, economics, and security across the entire globe. Nations often aligned themselves with one side or the other, creating a world divided by ideology and military alliances. Although the superpowers avoided direct large-scale war against each other, the threat of nuclear conflict remained constant. Both nations built massive arsenals of nuclear weapons capable of destroying the planet many times over. This balance of power created a tense situation known as mutually assured destruction, in which neither side could launch a nuclear attack without facing catastrophic retaliation. In 1976, the United States celebrated a historic national milestone known as the United States Bicentennial, marking 200 years of independence since the signing of the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. This event was one of the largest patriotic celebrations in American history and symbolized 2 centuries of the nation's political development, cultural growth, and democratic traditions. Throughout the year, Americans across the country participated in grand celebrations, parades, festivals, concerts, and historical exhibitions designed to honor the country's founding ideals of liberty, democracy, and national unity. Cities, towns, and communities decorated streets with red, white, and blue flags, while schools, museums, and historical societies organized special programs to educate citizens about the nation's revolutionary origins and the struggles that led to independence from Great Britain. The bicentennial was not only a celebration of the past but also an opportunity for Americans to reflect on their national identity and achievements after 2 centuries of history that included the expansion of the nation across the continent, the American Civil War, industrialization, and the country's emergence as a global superpower after World War II. The U.S. government created the American Revolution Bicentennial Administration to coordinate nationwide events and encourage local communities to host their own celebrations. One of the most memorable events of the bicentennial year was the arrival of the Tall Ships Fleet in New York City, where ships from many nations sailed into the harbor in a grand display of international friendship and maritime tradition. Millions of spectators gathered along the waterfront to witness the spectacle, making it one of the most iconic moments of the celebrations. The bicentennial also included a special program called the Bicentennial Wagon Train Pilgrimage, in which participants traveled across the country in covered wagons to recreate the experience of early American pioneers. This journey symbolized the nation's westward expansion and the adventurous spirit of its early settlers. In Philadelphia, the historic city where the Declaration of Independence had originally been signed, major ceremonies and historical reenactments took place to commemorate the founding of the United States. The famous Liberty Bell, a powerful symbol of American freedom, attracted millions of visitors who came to witness the historic artifact and participate in the celebrations. Cultural and artistic projects also played an important role in the bicentennial year. The government supported the creation of monuments, historical restorations, documentaries, and educational materials that explored the nation's past and its democratic ideals. Television networks, newspapers, and schools produced special programs highlighting the stories of the George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and other leaders of the American Revolution, reminding Americans of the courage and vision that led to the birth of their country. Music and art also reflected the patriotic spirit of the bicentennial, with concerts, exhibitions, and performances celebrating American culture and diversity. On July 4, 1976, the official Independence Day celebration was especially spectacular. Across the United States, fireworks displays illuminated the skies, patriotic songs were performed, and millions of Americans gathered in parks, public squares, and historic landmarks to celebrate their country's 200th birthday. In Washington, D.C., the capital city, a massive national celebration took place near the National Mall, attended by large crowds and broadcast on television to millions of viewers across the country. President Gerald Ford played a central role in the national ceremonies, emphasizing the importance of unity, democracy, and civic responsibility as the United States entered its third century as an independent nation. The bicentennial also inspired a renewed interest in American history, leading many communities to restore historic buildings, preserve landmarks, and establish museums dedicated to the nation's heritage. Educational programs encouraged young Americans to learn more about their country's founding principles, including freedom, equality, and representative government. For many citizens, the bicentennial served as a moment of reflection during a challenging period in U.S. history that followed the Vietnam War and the political turmoil of the Watergate scandal. The celebrations helped strengthen national pride and provided an opportunity for Americans to come together in a spirit of unity and optimism about the future. By honoring the past while looking toward the future, the United States bicentennial of 1976 became a powerful reminder of the nation's enduring commitment to democracy and freedom. Even decades later, the bicentennial remains one of the most memorable national celebrations in American history, symbolizing the resilience, diversity, and democratic ideals that continue to shape the identity of the United States. The late Cold War period, 1977 to 1991, was a crucial phase in global history during which tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union gradually moved toward negotiation and eventual resolution after decades of rivalry known as the Cold War, which had dominated world politics since the end of World War II. This period saw the leadership of three important American presidents, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, whose policies and decisions shaped the final outcome of the ideological struggle between capitalism and communism. When Jimmy Carter became president in 1977, the United States was emerging from a difficult period marked by the Vietnam War and the political damage caused by the Watergate scandal, which had weakened public trust in government and America's global image. Carter believed that American foreign policy should focus on human rights, diplomacy, and peaceful negotiation rather than relying primarily on military power, and he emphasized the moral responsibility of the United States to promote democratic values around the world. His administration openly criticized governments that violated human rights and encouraged political reforms in many countries, arguing that America's credibility as a democratic nation depended on defending the rights and freedoms of individuals everywhere. One of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of Carter's presidency was the negotiation of the Camp David Accords in 1978, a historic agreement that helped bring peace between Egypt and Israel, two nations that had fought several wars since the establishment of Israel in 1948. Determined to resolve this long-standing conflict, Carter invited Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem begin to the presidential retreat at Camp David in Maryland, where intense negotiations took place over nearly 2 weeks. Acting as a mediator, Carter worked tirelessly to bridge the deep political and security differences between the two leaders, and eventually the talks produced an agreement that laid the foundation for the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty of 1979. Under this agreement, Egypt officially recognized Israel and Israel agreed to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, making Egypt the first Arab nation to establish diplomatic relations with Israel and significantly reducing the likelihood of further large-scale wars in the region. The Camp David Accords were widely celebrated as a major success for international diplomacy and strengthened Carter's reputation as a peacemaker, demonstrating that persistent negotiation could resolve conflicts that had seemed impossible to settle. However, Carter's presidency soon faced a serious challenge that overshadowed many of his achievements: the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 to 1981. The crisis began when a revolution in Iran overthrew the government of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah who had been a close ally of the United States, and brought the Islamic cleric Ruhollah Khomeini to power. After the Shah was allowed to enter the United States for medical treatment, Iranian militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in November 1979 and took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage, accusing the United States of interfering in Iran's internal affairs. The hostages were held for 444 days, creating a prolonged international crisis that dominated American politics and damaged Carter's popularity at home. Efforts to negotiate the hostages' release were slow and complicated, and a military rescue mission known as Operation Eagle Claw failed when mechanical problems and an accident in the Iranian desert forced the mission to be aborted, resulting in the deaths of 8 American servicemen. The hostages were finally released in January 1981, shortly after Carter left office, marking the end of one of the most dramatic diplomatic crises of the late Cold War. Carter was succeeded by Ronald Reagan, whose presidency from 1981 to 1989 introduced a more assertive approach toward the Soviet Union while also reshaping the American economy. Reagan strongly opposed communism and believed that the United States needed to rebuild its military strength and economic power in order to confront Soviet influence effectively. During the early years of his administration, he increased defense spending and criticized the Soviet government, famously describing it as an evil empire, reflecting his belief that communism threatened global freedom and democracy. At the same time, Reagan implemented economic reforms known as Reaganomics, a set of policies based on supply-side economics that aimed to stimulate economic growth by reducing taxes, cutting government regulation, and encouraging private investment. Supporters argued that these policies helped expand the American economy during the 1980s, while critics pointed out that they also increased the national debt and economic inequality. Despite these debates, Reagan's economic strategy had a major influence on American economic policy and political discussions about the role of government in the economy. In the later years of his presidency, Reagan's relationship with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev became one of the most important factors in reducing Cold War tensions. Gorbachev recognized that the Soviet Union needed major reforms to address economic problems and introduced policies such as perestroika and glasnost to modernize the system. Reagan and Gorbachev met several times to discuss arms control and global security, and their negotiations eventually produced the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, which eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles and represented a significant step toward reducing the threat of nuclear war. By the time George H.W. Bush became president in 1989, dramatic political changes were already taking place across Eastern Europe, where many countries were challenging communist rule. One of the most powerful symbols of these changes was the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, when massive public demonstrations in East Germany forced the government to open the border between East and West Berlin, allowing citizens to travel freely for the first time in decades. The destruction of the wall symbolized the collapse of communist control in Eastern Europe and the growing demand for political freedom. These transformations continued until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, when economic difficulties, political reforms, and nationalist movements led the Soviet republics to declare independence, effectively ending the Soviet state and bringing the Cold War to a close. During Bush's presidency, the United States also confronted a major international crisis when Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, prompting the United States to organize a multinational coalition that launched the Gulf War in 1991, a military campaign that quickly defeated Iraqi forces and restored Kuwait's independence, demonstrating the continued global leadership and military strength of the United States in the new post-Cold War era. Presidency of Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001. The presidency of Bill Clinton marked one of the most transformative periods in modern American history, characterized by strong economic growth, major technological innovation, expanding globalization, and significant political controversies. In the presidential election of 1992, Clinton, the Democratic governor of Arkansas, defeated incumbent President George H.W. Bush. He became the 42nd President of the United States and assumed office on January 20, 1993. Clinton presented himself as a New Democrat, advocating moderate policies that combined economic growth with social reform. His presidency focused on strengthening the economy, reducing the federal deficit, improving education, expanding trade, and adapting the American economy to the emerging global and digital age. One of the most significant features of the Clinton administration was the remarkable economic expansion of the 1990s. The United States experienced one of the longest periods of economic growth in its history. Unemployment rates declined, inflation remained relatively low, and millions of new jobs were created. The rapid expansion of technology industries, particularly in areas such as software development, personal computing, and internet services, played a major role in this economic success. American businesses increasingly adopted digital technologies, which boosted productivity and efficiency. Cities such as Silicon Valley in California became global centers of technological innovation. The growth of companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, and Google symbolized the rise of the digital economy. These corporations not only transformed the American marketplace but also reshaped global commerce, communication, and information exchange. The rapid spread of the Internet during the 1990s created new opportunities for business, education, and entertainment, marking the beginning of the modern information age. Another major achievement of Clinton's presidency was the promotion of international trade and economic globalization. In 1994, the United States implemented the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, a landmark trade agreement signed between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. NAFTA eliminated many trade barriers and tariffs among the three countries, creating one of the largest free trade zones in the world. The agreement aimed to increase economic cooperation, promote investment, and encourage economic growth across North America. Supporters argued that NAFTA expanded export opportunities for American companies and strengthened economic ties among neighboring nations. However, critics believed that the agreement led to the loss of some manufacturing jobs in the United States as companies moved production to Mexico where labor costs were lower. Despite the controversy, NAFTA remained one of the most important economic policies of the Clinton era and significantly influenced global trade patterns. During Clinton's presidency, the federal government also made significant progress in reducing the national deficit and eventually achieving a budget surplus. At the beginning of the 1990s, the United States faced a large federal deficit due to increased government spending and reduced revenues. Clinton worked with Congress to implement fiscal reforms, including tax increases for higher-income earners and spending controls. These measures, combined with strong economic growth, significantly improved the nation's financial position. By the late 1990s, the United States achieved a federal budget surplus for the first time in decades. This fiscal success was widely viewed as a major accomplishment of the Clinton administration. The surplus allowed the government to reduce national debt and invest in social programs, infrastructure, and education initiatives. The Clinton administration also pursued various domestic reforms aimed at improving social welfare and government efficiency. In 1996, Clinton signed the welfare reform legislation known as the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which restructured the American welfare system. The law aimed to encourage employment and reduce long-term dependency on government assistance. It placed time limits on welfare benefits and promoted work requirements for recipients. While supporters argued that the reform helped many people transition into employment, critics claimed that it reduced support for vulnerable populations. Nevertheless, the reform represented a significant shift in American social policy during the 1990s. Clinton's presidency also emphasized education, crime reduction, and healthcare reform. Although his early efforts to introduce a comprehensive national healthcare plan failed in Congress, the administration expanded children's healthcare coverage through the State Children's Health Insurance Program, SCHIP. Crime rates also declined during the 1990s, partly due to economic improvements and new law enforcement strategies introduced under federal programs. Clinton signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994, which provided funding for additional police officers and community policing initiatives across the country. Despite the administration's economic achievements, Clinton's presidency was overshadowed by political controversy and scandal during its later years. In 1998, Clinton became involved in a major political crisis known as the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. The controversy arose from Clinton's relationship with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. During a legal investigation, Clinton initially denied the relationship under oath. Later evidence revealed that his statements were misleading, which led to accusations that he had committed perjury and obstructed justice. As a result, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives voted to impeach Clinton in December 1998. Impeachment is a formal process in which a president is charged with serious misconduct by Congress. However, removal from office requires conviction by the Senate. In early 1999, the Senate conducted a trial to determine whether Clinton should be removed from the presidency. After reviewing the evidence and arguments from both sides, the Senate failed to reach the two-thirds majority required for conviction. Consequently, Clinton was acquitted and remained in office until the end of his second term. Although the impeachment crisis created intense political divisions in the United States, Clinton's public approval ratings remained relatively high, largely due to the continued strength of the American economy. Clinton's presidency also played an important role in international diplomacy and global security during the post-Cold War era. The United States participated in peacekeeping efforts in the Balkans, particularly in the conflicts involving Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo during the 1990s. The Clinton administration supported NATO military interventions aimed at stopping ethnic violence and stabilizing the region. These actions demonstrated the continuing global leadership role of the United States after the end of the Cold War. By the time Clinton left office in January 2001, the United States was experiencing strong economic performance, rapid technological progress, and expanding international trade relationships. The nation had achieved budget surpluses, low unemployment, and growing global influence. However, the political polarization that intensified during the impeachment process continued to shape American politics in the following decades. The presidency of George W. Bush marked one of the most dramatic and transformative periods in modern American history. Bush became the 43rd President of the United States after winning the highly controversial 2000 presidential election against Al Gore. The election was extremely close, particularly in the state of Florida, where disputes over vote counting led to legal challenges and recounts. Eventually, the United States Supreme Court decided the case in Bush versus Gore, effectively awarding the presidency to Bush. This decision ended the recount process and made Bush the winner, although the election remained controversial and debated for many years. Bush entered office in January 2001 with a focus on domestic issues such as education reform and tax reductions. However, the course of his presidency changed dramatically after the tragic events of September 11, 2001. On that day, terrorists from the extremist organization Al-Qaeda carried out coordinated attacks against the United States. 4 commercial airplanes were hijacked by terrorists. 2 of them crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, causing both buildings to collapse. Another plane struck the Pentagon near Washington, D.C., while the 4th plane crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers attempted to stop the hijackers. These attacks, known as the September 11th attacks, killed nearly 3,000 people and shocked the entire world. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in American history and fundamentally changed U.S. foreign and domestic policy. In response to the attacks, President Bush launched what became known as the War on Terror. The first major military action occurred in late 2001 when the United States and its allies invaded Afghanistan. At the time, Afghanistan was ruled by the extremist Taliban regime, which had provided shelter to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. The objective of the invasion was to destroy terrorist training camps, remove the Taliban government, and prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for international terrorism. This conflict became known as the War in Afghanistan, and it marked the beginning of the longest war in U.S. history. Although the Taliban regime was quickly removed from power, the conflict continued for many years as American and Allied forces attempted to stabilize the country and fight insurgent groups. Another major event during the Bush presidency was the Iraq War, which began in 2003. The United States accused the government of Saddam Hussein of developing weapons of mass destruction and supporting terrorism. Based on these concerns, the United States, along with several Allied countries, launched a military invasion of Iraq. The Iraqi government collapsed quickly, and Saddam Hussein was eventually captured by U.S. forces in 2003 and later executed by the Iraqi government. However, the war led to years of instability, sectarian violence, and insurgency within Iraq. The absence of confirmed weapons of mass destruction also generated controversy and criticism of the Bush administration's decision to go to war. Following the terrorist attacks of 2001, the United States also reorganized its domestic security system to better protect the country from future threats. In 2002, the government created the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, a large federal department responsible for coordinating national efforts to prevent terrorism, protect borders, and respond to emergencies. This new department combines several existing agencies, including border protection, immigration services, and disaster management, into a unified structure designed to improve national security. Another major challenge during the Bush presidency occurred toward the end of his second term with the global financial crisis of 2008. This crisis began in the United States housing market, where risky mortgage lending and financial speculation led to the collapse of major financial institutions. Banks, investment firms, and insurance companies faced severe losses, causing panic in global financial markets. Stock markets declined sharply, businesses closed, and millions of people lost their jobs. The crisis quickly spread around the world, triggering a global economic recession. In response, the U.S. government introduced emergency financial rescue programs to stabilize banks and prevent the complete collapse of the financial system. The presidency of George W. Bush was therefore defined by major international conflicts, security challenges, and economic crises. The events of September 11th, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and the 2008 financial crisis all had lasting impacts on American policy and global politics. Bush's leadership shaped the early 21st century and influenced how the United States responded to terrorism, security threats, and economic instability. The presidency of Barack Obama, 2009 to 2017, marked a significant period in modern American history. Obama became the 44th President of the United States after winning the 2008 election and was inaugurated on January 20, 2009. He made history as the first African American president, symbolizing a major milestone in the nation's social and political development. When Obama took office, the United States was facing a severe economic crisis following the global financial crisis. Millions of Americans had lost jobs, banks were collapsing, and the economy was shrinking rapidly. To address this situation, Obama introduced the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, 2009, a massive economic stimulus package worth about $787 billion aimed at creating jobs, supporting businesses, rebuilding infrastructure, and stabilizing the financial system. This policy helped prevent a deeper economic depression and gradually led to economic recovery during his presidency. One of Obama's most important domestic achievements was the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, often known as Obamacare. This landmark healthcare reform expanded health insurance coverage to millions of Americans, prevented insurance companies from denying coverage to people with pre-existing conditions, and allowed young adults to remain on their parents' insurance plans until age 26. Although the law was highly controversial and faced strong opposition from Republicans, it became one of the most significant social reforms in modern U.S. history. In foreign policy, Obama focused on ending long and costly wars in the Middle East. The United States gradually reduced military operations in Iraq and set a timetable to withdraw combat troops from Afghanistan, although the conflict there continued. A major success of Obama's counterterrorism strategy occurred in May 2011 when U.S. Special Forces carried out a secret raid in Abbottabad that resulted in the killing of Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda and mastermind behind the September 11 attacks. This event was widely viewed as a major victory for the United States in the global fight against terrorism. Obama's administration also emphasized diplomacy and international cooperation. In 2015, the United States joined the global climate agreement known as the Paris Agreement, aiming to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change. The same year, the Obama administration helped negotiate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran and other world powers to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting economic sanctions. On the domestic social front, Obama's presidency witnessed important civil rights developments. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in the landmark case Obergefell v. Hodges, marking a historic victory for LGBTQ rights. Obama also supported immigration reform and introduced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, program to protect certain undocumented immigrants who arrived in the United States as children from deportation. However, his presidency also faced significant challenges, including political polarization in Congress, debates over health care and immigration, racial tensions, and criticism over U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and Syria. Despite these challenges, Obama remained a highly influential global leader and promoted diplomacy, multilateral cooperation, and economic reform. By the time he left office in January 2017, the U.S. economy had largely recovered from the financial crisis, unemployment had significantly decreased, and the country had undergone major policy changes in healthcare, climate policy, and social rights. Overall, the presidency of Barack Obama represented a transformative period characterized by economic recovery, major healthcare reform, diplomatic engagement, and important social progress in the United States. The presidency of Donald Trump, 2017 to 2021, was one of the most controversial and politically divisive periods in modern United States history. Trump, a businessman and television personality, won the 2016 presidential election as the Republican candidate by defeating Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College, although she won the popular vote. He became the 45th President of the United States and was inaugurated on January 20, 2017. Trump entered office with the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and promoted an America First approach to domestic and foreign policy. One of the earliest actions of his administration was the signing of executive orders aimed at tightening immigration policies, including restrictions on travel from several Muslim-majority countries and plans to build a border wall along the U.S.-Mexico border to reduce illegal immigration. These policies sparked widespread debate and protests across the country. In domestic policy, one of Trump's most significant legislative achievements was the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. This law reduced corporate taxes and provided tax cuts for many individuals and businesses, with the goal of stimulating economic growth and encouraging investment in the United States. During the early years of his presidency, the U.S. economy experienced low unemployment rates and steady economic growth. Trump also focused on deregulation, reducing federal regulations on businesses, energy production, and environmental policies in order to promote economic expansion. However, critics argued that some of these policies weakened environmental protections and increased the national deficit. In foreign policy, Trump adopted a more unilateral approach and often challenged traditional alliances. His administration withdrew the United States from the Paris Agreement on climate change and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Trump also launched a major trade dispute with China by imposing tariffs on Chinese goods in order to address trade imbalances and protect American industries. This trade war created tensions between the two countries and had global economic implications. At the same time, Trump engaged in direct diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, becoming the first U.S. president to meet a North Korean leader in person during a historic summit in 2018. Although these meetings were widely publicized, they did not result in a permanent agreement on North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Trump's presidency also faced significant political challenges. In 2019, he was impeached by the United States House of Representatives on charges related to abuse of power and obstruction of Congress concerning his dealings with Ukraine. However, he was later acquitted by the United States Senate. The final year of Trump's presidency was dominated by the global outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, which caused a severe health crisis and economic disruption in the United States and around the world. The government implemented emergency measures, travel restrictions, and economic relief programs to address the crisis. The pandemic also became a central issue in the 2020 presidential election. The election of 2020 resulted in Trump losing to Democratic candidate Joe Biden. Trump disputed the election results, claiming widespread voter fraud, although courts and election officials found no evidence to support these claims. Tensions reached a peak on January 6, 2021, when a crowd of Trump supporters stormed the United States Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of the election results. The event shocked the nation and led to Trump becoming the first U.S. president to be impeached twice by the House of Representatives, though he was again acquitted by the Senate. Trump left office on January 20, 2021, marking the end of a presidency that significantly reshaped American politics, intensified partisan divisions, and influenced the country's domestic and international policies. The presidency of Joe Biden, 2021 to 2025, represents a significant period in recent United States history marked by efforts to recover from the global pandemic, strengthen the economy, and rebuild international alliances. Biden, a Democrat and former vice president under Barack Obama, won the 2020 presidential election by defeating the incumbent president Donald Trump. He became the 46th president of the United States and was inaugurated on January 20, 2021. Biden assumed office during a challenging time when the country was facing the severe effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, economic instability, and deep political divisions. One of his administration's first priorities was controlling the pandemic through a nationwide vaccination campaign, expanded testing, and public health measures. Millions of vaccine doses were distributed across the country in an effort to reduce infections and restore normal economic and social activities. To support economic recovery, Biden introduced a large stimulus package known as the American Rescue Plan in 2021. This legislation provided direct financial assistance to American families, expanded unemployment benefits, supported small businesses, and funded vaccination programs. The goal was to accelerate economic recovery after the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. In addition, Biden promoted long-term economic development through major infrastructure investments. In 2021, he signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which allocated billions of dollars for rebuilding roads, bridges, public transportation, internet access, and clean energy projects across the United States. These initiatives aimed to modernize the country's infrastructure and create millions of jobs. A major event in Biden's foreign policy occurred in 2021 when the United States ended its 20-year military involvement in Afghanistan. American troops were withdrawn, and the government supported by the United States collapsed shortly afterward, allowing the Taliban to regain control of the country. The rapid fall of the Afghan government led to widespread criticism and debate about the withdrawal strategy. Another major global challenge during Biden's presidency was the outbreak of the Russian invasion of Ukraine when Russia launched a large-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The United States strongly supported Ukraine by providing military assistance, economic aid, and diplomatic support, while also coordinating international sanctions against Russia with allies in Europe and other parts of the world. Domestically, Biden's presidency also addressed issues such as climate change, healthcare, and technological competition. The United States rejoined the Paris Agreement on climate change soon after he took office, demonstrating a renewed commitment to global environmental cooperation. Biden also supported policies aimed at expanding clean energy production and reducing carbon emissions. However, his administration faced challenges including rising inflation, political polarization in Congress, and debates over immigration and economic policy. Despite these difficulties, Biden emphasized restoring international partnerships, strengthening democratic institutions, and promoting economic stability. Overall, the presidency of Joe Biden from 2021 to 2025 focused on pandemic recovery, infrastructure development, global diplomacy, and addressing major domestic and international challenges facing the United States in the early 21st century. From 2025 to the present, the history of the United States has been marked by major political changes, economic debates, and international tensions. In January 2025, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States, beginning his second, non-consecutive term after winning the 2024 presidential election. J.D. Vance became Vice President. Early in the administration, the government focused on immigration control, economic nationalism, and changes in foreign policy. One major issue was trade policy. In 2025, the United States imposed tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, leading to a trade dispute and negotiations over the North American trade system. Domestic politics also became highly polarized. Large protest movements and political rallies were organized across the country by groups opposing government policies and calling for economic reforms and protection of civil rights. Economic and political disagreements in Congress caused a federal government shutdown in October-November 2025, temporarily closing many government agencies and affecting hundreds of thousands of federal employees. In foreign affairs, the United States continued to play a major role in global conflicts, trade negotiations, and technological competition. There were also debates about immigration, military policy, and America's leadership in space exploration and technology. Overall, the period from 2025 to the present reflects a time of political division, active international involvement, and ongoing debates about the country's economic and global role.